Hello folks and welcome back. In this tutorial we're going to look at how to build suspense in a film sequence using good shooting, editing and sound techniques. Now before we begin, I would like to point out that there are many different ways that suspense could be built into a scene. And this is due in no small part to the fact that there are many different scenarios in which suspense could be built. So, whilst there may be suspense in the opening of the film Jaws, or Captain Dallas's death in Alien, or let's face it, any number of sequences from numerous Hitchcock films, they all look different visually, have different ways that they use and manipulate sound and editing, and ultimately they all have a slightly different impact upon the viewer and the audience. So what I'm going to cover here is just one example of how it can be done. However, as we work through the scene, we're probably going to find out that there may be some general techniques that you might want to follow if you're thinking of crafting and generating your own. Let's begin by having a simple run-through of the scene itself. We begin with a typically gloomy, dark and windswept night, and are presented with a modern office building. We go inside and work our way up the stairs. A man works alone, typing at a desk. He hears a noise, pauses, looks around, gets up and goes to investigate. In the hallway, he calls out to see if it's any of his work colleagues. He hears the noise again and heads down the hallway slowly to see where the noise is coming from. He then enters the room at the end to find out what it is. Okay, so pretty uncomplicated and straightforward stuff. Someone sitting alone at night and hearing and investigating a noise is something we've seen many times before. However, its overall visual construction goes a long way to helping us as the audience feel the tension and suspense within the scene. Let's break down some of the decisions the filmmaker made. The first thing to notice is that the visual language is the same throughout. In this case, it's a fairly rigid system of locked down, stable tripod shots. If you're trying to craft a sequence like this, you want to be careful of mixing up your camera work too much throughout the scene. One thing that's guaranteed to distract your audience from feeling the suspense too much is a great deal of variety in your camera work. If you want to go with handheld, fine. If you want to go with a fixed tripod, fine. And you can even combine the two to great effect on occasion. However, if you mix up your shot choice too much, you run the risk of encouraging the audience to see your changes in style, rather than feeling the tension within the scene. In this instance, the rigid system of lockdown tripod-based shots is pretty much always, in the early stages anyway, at a straight angle. The straight angle puts the viewer in a position of normality. However, the rigid conformity of the lockdown shots, which don't move from left to right or tilt up and down, forces the viewer to stand and stare. It is at once both familiar and unnerving. We can observe the character as he moves around, but we can't as an audience move across the room or down the corridor with him. We're not invited to move near to him, feel what he is feeling, or generate any great sense of empathy for his situation. It is this rigidity and refusal to move the camera that heightens the sense of danger as he heads down the corridor. We don't move with him. We can't move with him. We just stand and stare as he works his way away from us towards the point of danger. As the scene reaches its end point, the final shot choice is an exaggerated low angle. It's quite a change from all the straight angles we've had before, and visually clues the audience up to the fact that something isn't quite right. This harks back to the classic film phrase of show, don't tell. Don't tell us in the script necessarily by dialogue that something is wrong. There's no subtlety in that. You can use camera angles to show the audience that something is wrong. In this case, the change to the low angle is such a change from the straight angles beforehand that we get the sense that something isn't quite right. Perspective can also be played with to great effect, and it's actually with perspective where you might want to be more playful and mix things up a bit in order to play with the audience's sense of space and how they read the character's place within it. If you can manipulate the audience in terms of how they perceive depth and space in a room, then you'll start to make them feel slightly more uncomfortable than usual. In this section of the scene, for example, the sequence goes from a shot with a deeper sense of space and a one-point perspective to a shot with less perspective to a shot with zero perspective, in which depth and space have been flattened out. By cutting these three together, we start to cramp the sense of space within the room and generate a greater sense of claustrophobia. Flat shots like this one, which are composed on the X and Y axis only and have no sense of Z axis depth, will often make the environment look odd to us as an audience, as we don't see the world as a flat space. We see depth and the world around us as something that has three dimensions. It's only when we get to the next shot that the sense of depth and geography is returned to us. The use of a deeper one-point perspective gives the corridor a greater sense of depth. And it's now the editing that starts to really exaggerate the sense of tension. By not cutting to any comfortable close-ups or medium shots of the character, the longer take means that we're forced to stand back and let him walk off down the corridor to whatever might be awaiting in the room. Another great technique to use when generating suspense is again to play with the audience's sense of space by sudden and abrupt changes in shot type. Now, I don't mean here consistently leaping from tripod to handheld or from straight angles to canted frames or low and high angles. I mentioned that right at the beginning. What I do mean is that maybe one or two carefully placed cuts from a long shot straight to a close-up can give an audience a sudden visual lurch that they weren't expecting. If you're able to be in a position where you can edit a visual jump from a very long shot, like this one in the corridor, to a close-up of the keys opening the lock, then you'll add to the audience's sense of discomfort. Crashing from a long shot to a close-up like this also works well if you can make a sudden leap in sound, like this. It's a bit of a crude mechanical tactic, but orally and visually it can work in the right context. Sound and editing techniques, such as the one just demonstrated, will be covered further in the next tutorial. See you then.